You're listening to City of Muses on Paris Underground Radio. Welcome to the Season 3 premiere of City of Muses on Paris Underground Radio. I'm your host, Jennifer Geraghty. I'm a screenwriter, filmmaker, and the creator and founder of the Paris Underground Radio podcast network. Each week, I sit down with an artist or creative to talk about what inspires them, what their creative process is like, and how Paris plays into it all. I am thrilled to introduce you to Jase King, a multidisciplinary artist from Australia living in the City of Light. Jase is a talented painter, sculptor, and photographer, but it's his avant-garde face masks, or face sculptures, that I was immediately obsessed with. You can see some of his brilliant work on the Paris Underground Radio Instagram page. Jase's work has been shown at Art Basel, New York Fashion Week, the IFA Paris Instanbul Fashion Show, among others, and he most recently creative directed 3 shows at AQUA Art Miami. In our conversation, Jase shares how a global pandemic inspired a new art form, how he transforms an abstract feeling into a concrete piece, and how one plate of pasta started it all. Hello, Jase. Thank you so much for meeting with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to be able to talk to you. I have been Instagram stalking you for a very long time.
We have been in touch since, I think, 6 months ago, maybe, or even 9 months ago?
Well worth the wait. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I discovered you because of your, I want to call them masks, but I think they're really face sculptures.
Yes, you can call them masks. A lot of people do, but yeah, I consider them face sculptures because they're more sculptural, and a lot of the time they're good on its own rather than on the face. It really depends.
I'm so curious about them. I have a million questions for you all about them. But before we get into that, please pardon the pun. Let's get to know the man behind the mask. So you're from Australia, is that right?
Yes. So I was born in Australia, Melbourne actually, to be specific. My dad is from Singapore. My mom's Vietnamese. So I'm sort of first generation, if you consider that first generation Australian, yeah.
Sure. And were you an artistic child?
I was. I remember I excelled in all the art classes, all the literature, all the English, failed miserably in everything else. So I would say so.
I see. Were you always drawn to subjects like art and fashion, these sorts of things?
Not fashion particularly. I don't think as a child I was drawn to fashion, but I was definitely drawn to dinosaurs. I was drawn to paintings, drawings, things of that nature.
Now that you say that, I can't help but notice there is a noticeable lack of dinosaurs in your face sculptures.
Lack of dinosaurs?
Yeah, I don't see any reference to any dinosaurs. I don't know if that's something you need to bring back.
Well, I'm always trying to create creatures, I call them. They've been sort of coined by the public, très bizarre masks.
Yes.
And they're almost like characters. So you wouldn't be surprised. One day I might bring back a dinosaur. So it's all like a reflection of my childhood, of my experiences, and also the world that I want to create, basically.
I love that. Do you come from an artistic family?
Do I? I'm trying to think. I don't think so. I think I'm the only one.
Was your family supportive of you pursuing this craft?
Not particularly, because I had to fight tooth and nail, but I did go to a performing arts school for college. And that's where I think everything sort of stems from, the performative aspect of my work, the understanding of light and direction and tableaus and storytelling, a lot of it. So, yeah, I think once I enrolled and got into performing arts school, it was sort of like all systems go, and they sort of supported me and came to my shows after that. So it all started, I think the support started for them during college.
That makes sense. It makes sense that maybe seeing something tangible would be helpful.
Yeah.
For people who don't understand a certain art field.
Exactly.
So what brought you to Paris?
So love, actually. I think a lot of people would say that. And also, I think it wasn't sort of a dream, so to speak, or a goal rather, but it is sort of like an artist's dream to sort of spend some time in Paris, to sort of get that history and also immerse in the French art scene, so to speak, and also sort of just draw from all these places and people who have gone before us who were so artistic before, and see what's the deal.
How long have you been here?
Well, let's see. I think I've been here 8 years.
Okay. And how do you find France is receptive to or not receptive to your sort of art?
I don't know if they're receptive, so to speak, because just based on press, I feel like I get more international press. But in terms of, I think also the French culture is sort of like, they're not surprised by anything. They don't show that much, emotions on their faces, or they don't tell you if they like something or not. So sometimes I do rock up in like my full attire with my face sculptures. And yes, they do sort of stare and look and sort of like wonder, but it's never sort of like a fanfare or, it's nothing. They don't make a big deal out of it, so to speak.
That's not really the culture. You're right.
No. Yeah, they're more subdued in their expression.
Do you find that your work has changed since you've been here?
Well, the creation of my face sculpture started in Paris. I would say Paris most definitely, consciously or subconsciously, played a huge role in that.
Well, so that's, okay, let's talk about that. Your face sculptures are incredible. They're unlike anything I've ever seen before. And it seems to me that you've sort of invented an entirely new art form. So how did this come to be? Like, what was the nugget? Where did this start?
Well, thank you for saying that, first of all. It's kind of interesting to invent something in this time and age. So I sort of did it, and I allowed everybody else to sort of just figure it out where it should be placed. So it happened actually during the pandemic. I had been, like all of us, self-isolation at home. And I had a lot of like materials and fabrics because I do work in the fashion industry sometimes as a photographer as well as a lecturer sometimes in summer. So I do have a lot of like leftover fabrics and things that I've collected over the years. And during that time, we were stuck at home and I sort of just thought, well, what can I do? I mean, I can't do anything. And I just sort of ran through the house and like took apart Christmas ornaments. I took apart denim jackets and just sort of like put everything on the floor and said, okay, this is what I have. Let me see what I can make with it. And so that's how it basically started during the pandemic, during self-isolation. And I remember sort of doing a few pieces and then sort of just like posting it on Instagram and whatnot. And I think at that time it was really interesting as well because the fashion industry was thinking, oh, wow, it's sort of like so cool that something so fantastical is coming out of a period where the whole world was sort of like in sweatpants, and the art world was sort of like embracing it as well because it was sort of a similar capacity, but in the art, sort of like the self-expression, like the ebbs and flows of an artist, right? So you can see how my mind went and how it was sort of like going through the materials I was using. I started off using really sort of dull materials, and through the pandemic, you could see them becoming more brighter, colorful, and sort of more luxurious by the end of it. So it was quite interesting. And so I sort of just let it out into the world. And I'm so thankful that both the art and the fashion sort of collided and created this sort of like mold and this cusp where I belong to. So I'm really thankful for that. So it's been good.
It's really interesting. I think something about being an artist during the pandemic, it sort of takes you out of time, because normally I don't want to speak for you, but normally there's a pressure to create, to make something. We have deadlines, we have, we want to show by this date or this time, but because we were outside of time, maybe you had this extra freedom to just explore something that normally you would never have been drawn to.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there. And also, I think it's so important for an artist to continue creating, whether it's in the form of writing or self-documentation or anything, because creative thoughts and feelings and emotions can't stop because the world is going through a hard time. In fact, they should be documented because I think artists are very much like the timekeepers and the history, like documentarians, because based on something that you see in art form, it could really dictate a specific timeline in history, in humanity, and how everybody was feeling. So in many ways, I hope what I've created sort of like inspires people to feel that you don't need too much to be creative. Sometimes you just have to dig deeper within, and don't think of it as I have to create something. Think of it as what do I want to say today or right now, So in that process, you will create something in the long run, but I think it's important to always just create, even though times are not, always rosy, so to speak.
What was it that drew you to the face? Why a face sculpture and not a piece of clothing or an accessory or something more traditional?
Because I hate wearing the face, what's those called? The surgical masks?
Oh, yeah, okay.
So I hated wearing them. And I was like, well, the world is just so engrossed in this thing now, which is, these surgical masks. I want to create something where it's sort of like a fantastical take on the surgical mask. So that's how it came about.
That makes perfect sense as soon as you say it. Yeah. Okay, great. What was the first piece you ever created?
So interestingly enough, it was actually made out of pasta. So before I took everything apart, I had like spaghetti at home. So I just remembered Googling, I'm like, has anybody done a spaghetti mask? And through my research, it hasn't been done. So I was like, okay, let me just try to do this. So I knew I had some latex glue. I knew I had pasta. And I knew I had my face. And I knew I had all the time in the world to do whatever I wanted. So I sort of just cooked the pasta, sort of put it on my face, glued it to my face. And then when it dried, it created this sort of like interesting shell armor texture. And it sort of shrunk. And I just documented it. I just took pictures of it. So my first mask, so to speak, was actually made out of spaghetti.
I love that. I love the mind that thinks, what would happen if I stuck spaghetti on my face with some latex glue?
Yes, there you go.
When you're creating a piece now, how strong is the idea in your mind when you begin?
So if I'm creating for a specific project, like I knew I had Art Miami coming up, so I knew I wanted to create 12 show-worthy pieces that can be worn on the face and displayed, but they have to be so sort of elevated because they have to be in a performance, right? So I sort of thought about the performative aspect and how it had to sort of like look at a certain time of day because I knew the show was going to be at 4:00. So I was like, okay, so I needed it to sort of like reflect. I needed the sizes to be big because it's such a big venue. You need to make something that the back room the people at the back can see it. So based on those sort of qualities, I created 12 pieces for the show. If I were to create something that is just from the heart and not for a specific project, I think my inspiration can come from anything or anywhere, really.
To give our listeners an idea of what we're talking about, these face sculptures, and correct me if I'm wrong, they tend to have some sort of headdress. Sometimes it can be like a horn, something quite high up above the head. They tend to have pieces that encircle the face. Sometimes the eyes are covered. Sometimes the mouth is covered. Sometimes all the features are exposed. And they tend to have long tassels hanging from everything.
Yes.
From the horns, from like, I guess, creating like a beard, something like that.
Yeah. So I try to create pieces that is not something that I've seen before. So I don't really work with wood or like things that you normally associate with masks. And I try not to use things like feathers because I try to sway people from thinking it's like a carnival mask. So I try to find materials that it's not so common. So I do use like fish bait, I think you call them, things that you use for fishing, silicone pieces. I use pom-poms, I use tassels, I use a lot of rhinestones and beading, and I use gauze and also vegan leather. So I use a lot of things that are sort of like not usually seen together. And based on each piece, I sort of create a narrative or something that comes from the heart. And therefore, sometimes like maybe the eyes will be covered because I want to say something about, a hindered eyesight or like a blockage of vision. Or sometimes I want to talk about hair. So during the pandemic, so many people around the world were dying. So I thought I wanted to immortalize the human spirit. I couldn't find real hair, obviously, but I knew I had like a bunch of party wigs that were sitting in a box that I had bought like years ago. So I took the hair and I sort of deconstructed the wigs and I used the hair to symbolize the human spirit because hair is something that doesn't decompose when you die. So that's why you see some parts of my work has a lot of hair pieces in it, synthetic hair. So it really depends on the narrative that I'm trying to speak, But obviously you can see the ebbs and flows, how it started, through how it's sort of going right now. I have included the usage of clay and other aspects as well to sort of give it a different perspective.
Are you a book lover who's always looking for the next best book? Or an avid reader who'd love the chance to ask their favorite author a question? Well, then you might like my other podcast, Storytime in Paris, where I interview writers with a French connection, with questions that come from you, the author's fans and followers. Then, the authors treat us to a reading from their books. Listen now to Storytime in Paris on parisundergroundradio.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll be right back with City of Muses after a word from our sponsors. And now, back to City of Muses on Paris Underground Radio. Do you have any favorite objects or materials or accessories that you like to work with?
I think I'm pretty well known for the pom-poms and the tassels. So I think to sort of have that signature is something that I would keep. And then everything else can be sort of exchanged, I think. I think it's good to have like somebody that sees something and knows, okay, well, that's from Jase because, this is his work. So I just want to sort of keep a few elements that's easily recognizable.
Have you ever tried adding something that didn't work?
Yes, actually. I don't know if it's considered not working, but I did have a lot of offcuts from 3D printers. So they were sort of like phone cases that had been broken or things that did not come out properly from a 3D printer. And I have like a stash of them. So I decided to create a mask with it. But obviously because it's not bendy, it became more like a helmet rather than a mask. So yeah, and there's a lot of times things don't really work out as well. But it's really trial and error initially, especially with new fabrics or materials.
Well, and you're creating something that doesn't really have a template either. You're sort of going in your own direction, your own path.
Yeah. So I think I hope to create something sort of like a stamp. So like even if my work is sort of seen in other aspects, you'll know, okay, well, that's his signature. That's his thing.
I noticed that some of your pieces have really personal names, like My Hidden Worth or My Lungs When I Kiss You Back, which is a great name, or Wishes for the 11-Year-Old Me. Do you usually know the name of the piece before you create it?
I can't tell you 100% that is true. I think a lot of times the piece sort of inspires me back. I do know the direction I'm going in, but I don't necessarily have a name for it just yet. And when it sort of creates and molds and, it does its own thing, and then I get inspired through the piece as well. But there are sometimes some pieces which I really love the name for. I don't know how much I can say on this podcast, but there are certain, there's some naughty names that I've given that I want to use. And based on that and my emotion behind that, I create a piece for it.
When you're starting a new piece, something like My Hidden Worth,
yeah.
Where do you start? Is it an image? Is it a color? Is it a shape? Like, how do you get this abstract feeling into a concrete object?
So, I think with a lot of artists, you sort of, you're taught to have the canvas, draw a sketch of it, and then you apply the paint, and then you apply the varnish. So there's almost like a template of doing things. Or when you're designing an outfit, to sketch it out first and then do the patterns and then produce it. So the way I work is quite interesting because I don't really follow a standard method. Sometimes I sketch, most of the times I don't, because I just like to see where it takes me. Sometimes I'm inspired by the materials. Like, for example, the hair, I wanted to incorporate that. I will specifically work with that. Other times I would just sort of go in there and see what happens. I don't really have a formula, so to speak. And I also create 3 to 4 pieces at the same time. Yeah, so because it's quite taxing because of all the beadwork and things, it can be a bit taxing to be doing the same thing all the times. I like to sort of just work on something, leave it there, pick something else up and continue. And then, so I work on 3, 4 pieces at the same time until it's done.
How long does it take to create a piece?
It can take anywhere between, well, let's just say the hair is pretty easy. So I can do that, let's just say, in a few days. But for the extravagant pieces that I've done for Art Miami, some of them took me 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. So let's talk about Art Miami. So you just creative directed 3 shows, as I understand it.
Yeah, that's right. So the year before, I was invited to partake, and my work was just sort of exhibited in the lobby. I was, I think, the last artist they pulled in because I literally had less than 30 days. And so nothing was for sale. It was just there to be looked at and sort of like, for exposure. And this, well, it's already the next year. Okay, so I'm just going to say last year, which was just December, it was so good because not only was I having my own space in a room, I had like 3 shows to put on. So it was fantastic to have models wearing my pieces during the show and with me putting myself in the show as well, which I thought was kind of, it's been a long time since I've put myself in anything. I sort of creative directed and just stand back and let it happen. But I thought, you know what? I think it's time. I really want to do it. And it's brought back a spark in me and, from my college days. So I was like, okay, that's good. So it was really nice. We had activations on VIP night. The response was really good, actually. We had lines down the street. People were waiting 45 minutes to come in. They were all VIP ticket holders. And the year before that, I wasn't even invited for VIP night. So for me, it was it was a step up. And also, yeah, the show brought so much exposure and so much knowledge of what the sort of art fashion scene is like in Miami, and definitely learned a lot. Definitely.
How much time did you have to prepare for that?
This one, I had about 6 months. Pretty good.
Okay. It still seems like it would be enormously stressful.
Yeah, no, so I sort of knew that I was part of the lineup last year for December. So I sort of started working my pieces way before. So I just left the show component until a bit later. But everything else, I knew I was part of it. So I sort of worked, as steadily throughout the year to create the pieces.
And I saw that the theme for your Art Basel show was deconstructing identity. And you said in your video that sometimes a sense of identity can't be stated in an I am declaration. Sometimes it needs to be expressed. Mm-hmm. Where did that theme come from, and how important is it for you to find a way to express your identity?
Well, I think identity in all of us is such a paramount personality trait of all of us. It can come from our parents, it can come from culture, it can come from our sexuality, it can come from so many things. And, it's easy to just slap a label on things, right? And also being an Asian in Australia, I think that identity was sort of highlighted to me at a very young age. I remember I was the only Asian kid in school, for example, in primary school. So it was very obvious to me that I wasn't the same as everybody else. So even though you're a child, the concept of what you think of identity has always lingered in the background, as well as when you grow up, it's always there. Everybody faces it on some level. You can't escape identity. I think it's something that encompasses the whole world, really. So I thought it was quite interesting to deconstruct it and sort of like breathe life in a different way and let the audience member figure out and sort of think about that within themselves.
I think it's such an interesting idea to take a concrete statement like I am X and then distill it into something emotional and expressive and then translate that into something else that's concrete and tangible. It's a really interesting evolution.
It is interesting. And I also think it's sort of like a through line with my work, like with my pieces. Are you hiding something when you put it on, or are you revealing who you are inside? So that's also identity. It's all encompassing, which I thought it was a good theme for the show.
Well, that leads me to another question. So what is the experience like of wearing one of your masks and performing in it versus like creating it and looking at it from the outside? What is that experience like? What is the difference like for you?
Oh, wow. It can be actually quite different. I get a little bit nervous when it's when it's being worn and I'm not around. Like, for example, if like for fashion shows and they use it for fashion show and I'm not backstage, because, it gets really chaotic backstage. It's almost like, it's not just like a t-shirt for me. It's a piece of art. So it's a bit hard for me to sort of like let that go and let somebody else take the reins. But if I'm in control of it, an example, like if I'm creative directing the show, I know how they're going to be. And so I can relax a little bit. The way that it's sort of created with the tassels, it looks great in movement, right? So a lot of dancers love to pull it for their shows or for their performances because it looks great in movement. There are certain pieces which I make, which are just specifically for an exhibition, for example, which I feel, especially the ones that I'm working on now, they're completely different from what I've ever done before. They are never going to be worn in a show because they're supposed to be observed and appreciated in an exhibition space. So I think, there are certain pieces that will look great, will work great for both, and certain pieces just for gallery's sake.
It's so interesting. I was going to ask you because I was looking at some of your performance pieces, and there does seem to be this element of dance and movement in all of them. Are you a dancer?
No, no. So performing arts, you're sort of trained to do a few things. So dancing was part of it. So we were trained in things like jazz, ballet, and things like that. I would not consider myself a dancer, no. But I do move my body.
And I saw that you were at New York Fashion Week last year.
Yes.
And you've also done some runway shows for Paris, Istanbul, and Miami.
Yeah, so we had 50 pieces in the French Palais de Français in Istanbul. So it's like this French palace. So I had my 50 of my pieces there during a fashion show. I've participated in New York Fashion Week, which was really great as well. So I love the fact that it's taking me to the art and the fashion component. So it's something that I really adore. A lot of stylists really pull them for fashion shoots because they're really editorial looking as well. Yeah, fashion and art, like bring it on. I know some people are sort of like, well, fashion is not art, art is not fashion, and there's always an argument, if you want to get into it. But the things that I'm doing is not based on trends. It's not based on producing something for the masses where everybody will buy. I would consider a luxury item. So as much as you would pay for a piece of something on your wall, it's something that you'll pay for my work. It's one of a kind and it's handmade and there are no replicas. So my business model is pretty much towards the art side, even though it can be considered fashion pieces because people can wear them in a fashion context.
I think it's reductive to say that fashion isn't art. I mean, maybe a tank top from Monoprix is not art, but you look at these haute couture creations and those are definitely art.
Absolutely.
When you're doing a runway show, is there a collaboration between, I am assuming you're not doing the clothing as well.
No.
So is there a collaboration between you and the clothing designer, and how does that relationship tend to work?
So it's usually, okay, in the context of a fashion show, it would be with a specific designer or designers. If it's a group show, if it's for like a magazine, it would be a stylist sort of like contacting me and pulling the pieces for the fashion shoot itself. And same thing for choreography for dancers. Either the choreographer or the dancers will approach me for a collaboration myself for it. So yeah, it really depends.
Does French culture sometimes leave you scratching your head? Well, you might enjoy listening to our sister podcast, Navigating the French, hosted by journalist Emily Monaco. Each episode focuses on a different word in the French language, and Emily is joined by an expert who will help explore what that word says about French culture. Listen now to Navigating the French on ParisUndergroundRadio.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll be right back with City of Muses after a word from our sponsors. And now, back to City of Muses on Paris Underground Radio. You said you started as a photographer.
Sort of, yes. So I lived in China for 2 years. And prior to that, I lived in Abu Dhabi for 7 years. And while I was in Abu Dhabi, I picked up photography. And I was documenting humans in their natural state. Not so much like selfies, you say, but I would travel to places like the Himalayas, Tibet. I would go to Syria. I've been to a lot of places that people don't consider the most photogenic or the most holiday destination vibes. So I went to a lot of these places just to capture people, photograph them in their element. I went to jump with the Maasai. So that's sort of how I approach photography. And then when I moved to China, I sort of was photographing campaigns for Chinese brands when I was there. And so that was sort of my foray into the fashion photography side of things.
I was looking at your website. You seem to be drawn to this portraiture.
Yeah, people.
Yeah, people, but some of them are more like street style. Some of them are very editorial, very fashion forward. What is it that makes something photo worthy in your eyes?
It's not about the image. It's about the emotion, right? So I don't ask somebody for permission. That's why a lot of the times I don't put a lot of stuff on my website because I like to take candid photos. So I don't have the model release for them, right? So it's not like it's shot in a studio with a model. I'm shooting actual people on the street. And a lot of the times, they probably don't know I'm shooting them. But that's what I want to capture. I want to capture like a natural state. Not knowing if I was going to use them in any shape, way, or form, but I sort of just enjoyed the process of it. I have a huge collection, actually. I have about 250,000 images.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I have a lot of images of that time. Absolutely love capturing people, especially, I don't know, I have affinity towards like old people or older people.
What do you think it is that draws you to them?
I don't know. It's the lines on their face. It's the really sort of like, I don't know, like tanned but wrinkly skin, the wrinkly hair. I don't know. There's just something about the non-perfect image that I enjoy.
Mm. I was talking to a sculptor in one of the previous episodes of City of Muses, and she was saying she likes to sculpt older people as well because you can really see the life that they've lived in their skin and their wrinkles. And
absolutely, that's right.
It's like a roadmap to what their life has been.
Yeah, absolutely, because they're not encouraged by society about these beauty standards, right? So they've lived their life. And it looks great on them. So I think it's like a medal to be worn. Why should you hide it? And I sort of like that about the older generation in those natural countries where, I think that's beautiful.
I agree with you. And maybe you've already answered this question in a small part here, but I noticed that you have all sorts of inspirations for your face sculptures from looks like Shakespeare to Greek gods and the cosmos and Egyptian gods and all of this. What do you do when you lack for artistic inspiration or motivation?
So I think a great example I would have to pull from was during the pandemic. I obviously could not be inspired elsewhere, right? I was sort of stuck within my four walls, as was the rest of us. So I had to seek deep within, and I found memories like the blue piece that you see there.
Mm.
It's called Midnight Ocean. So basically it was a memory of my childhood where my auntie would bring me to a fisherman's village, sort of like built on stilts in the sea. And I remember sort of like peering through the planks of wood and seeing these reflections, like these blacks and these blues, like glitter in the moonlight. And that's sort of like my inspiration behind that. So I sort of went back and just, recalled memories and experiences that I had, and I just drew from within.
It's really interesting, especially since I can see the piece you're talking about. Obviously, the colors correlate to everything you're saying, but there's also the shape. It looks like the movement of waves, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I'm noticing as well that your pieces all have this sense of symmetry. How important is symmetry to you?
It's interesting. Definitely, I think symmetry is what society perceives as beautiful, right? I do have some pieces that are symmetrical, but I also have pieces that's not symmetrical. I don't know if you can see them. But I sort of like these two here, this one here and this one, they're not symmetrical.
Oh, yeah.
So it sort of depends. And these collections are sort of my earlier works. If you can see, they are upcycled materials. They don't look too glittery or shiny because I haven't entered that stage of my mind yet with them. Whereas, I don't know, like the bigger piece, I don't know if you can see them, but if you look at the bigger pieces up there.
Oh, wow.
Like these are the ones that are sort of like more luxurious looking. They're huge.
Oh, it's amazing to look in your studio. I want to I don't know, skip around and play. It's like a fantasy land.
Yeah, and these ones here are just made of hair.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
So yeah, they're all a little different. And these ones are sort of neon with silicone pieces made from fish bait, as they call it in fishing.
Wow. Okay, so what is next for you? What are you working on now?
I wish I could show you because it's literally right here, but I can't because I'm still in my experimental stages with them. So what I mean by that is what I can say is I've implemented science back into my pieces.
Okay.
I've always drawn inspiration from the cosmos and from the universe. And I sort of want to bring a science element into it. So yeah, they're just right here. I can't show you just yet, but yeah, that's what I'm doing now. And in terms of exhibitions and things like that, I've got one thing coming up that was supposed to happen now, but it's been pushed to March. It's for an exhibition somewhere in Europe. So yeah, I mean, I can't reveal anything because they haven't announced it publicly yet, and the dates keep shifting and they keep moving, so I can't tell you.
Well, when you do know the dates, let me know and I'll include it in the show notes because this episode will come out in March. And so maybe the timing will work out perfectly for our audience.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. And
until then, where can people find you? How can they keep up to date with what you're doing?
You can find me on my website, jaseking.eu, but I'm predominantly more active on Instagram, jaseking. And then I think that's it. I mean, I'm pretty new to Threads, so but I'm there as well.
Perfect. Well, I'll include links to all of that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jase. This was such a delight.
Well, I'm so glad that, we finally got to connect after all these months, and it's really a pleasure for me to explain a little bit of what I do, and I really enjoy listening to your podcast. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. I'm an enormous fan of what you're doing. I can't wait to see what you evolve into. It's really, really fun to watch.
I'll invite you next time I'm doing something in Paris.
I would love that. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you for listening to City of Muses. If you've liked what you heard, please take a moment to rate and review it. This is the fastest and easiest way to help support the podcast. Tell a friend who could use a little inspiration. You can also subscribe to the Paris Underground Radio newsletter over on our website, parisundergroundradio.com, which comes out every Sunday and gives a little peek into what's on the network for the week ahead. I'm your host, Jennifer Geraghty. You can find me on all socials at Jennyphoria. That's JennyPhoria. Thank you for listening, and may you find inspiration wherever you go. City of Muses was produced by Jennifer Geraghty for Paris Underground Radio.